I was arrested when I was a teenager. I have a couple of scars on my body, and my dad said to me, you know, if you want to die at an early age, you just keep this up. He said, you know, you've got to take a whole different perspective on life. It had an impact on me. One of our best success stories is a company called Extreme. The entrepreneur had been part of a prior startup that was successful. Here at Allegis, at our venture fund, we have 33 major corporations who are our partners. He talked to Fujitsu and Siemens and co-branded his product when he only had 4 employees in the company. We backed that company, and 2 years later, he had a $14 billion market cap. It's a very trying experience to work with your wife. If you're both driven, then it can be a benefit. She came from an entrepreneurial family. She was, in fact, I think more driven than I was. To be a successful venture capitalist, you have to be a little greedy. You have to be focused on making money. And as you've accumulated more and more, you realize that there's a lot more things in life than that. We were helped by a lot of people, and we always said someday we're going to do the same thing back. Part of it was to make sure that kids who were maybe disadvantaged got a better chance. And we've put most of our effort and money into scholarships and into helping entrepreneurs take a chance and have confidence in yourself. It's worth taking risk, and it's worth failing, because through failure you learn, and great things can happen, so do it. Remember that you probably have been helped by people to get where you are, and don't turn your back on that, and try to help people to make a success out of their lives, and that's probably more rewarding than making it out of your own life.
Greater Good Radio. Connect, learn, heal, and grow. This Greater Good archive video is brought to you by Brain Gain Hawaii, a boutique executive recruiting, career development, and coaching firm. Learn more at braingainhi.com.
Welcome to our show, Barry.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Barry, how would you define your job, a venture capitalist?
Well, principally, we raise money, usually in a blind pool. We might raise that money from large corporations, wealthy families, endowments. And then we try to find entrepreneurs that have incredible ideas and have talent. And we invest in those entrepreneurs and try to help them build their companies and make them very, very successful, including becoming global companies, including becoming public companies. So basically, we're coaches, and we're also facilitators.
Can you give an example of maybe an entrepreneur that came in, kind of how it went, and boom, they went IPO or got a good acquisition?
Well, one of our best success stories is a company called Extreme. It's a gigabit Ethernet company. The entrepreneur had been part of a prior startup that was successful. There were a lot of gigabit Ethernet companies started in Silicon Valley. This was around 1997. But he had a different idea. His idea was to go outside of the U.S. and find customers who were non-U.S. customers and who wanted the same kind of technologies that U.S. companies did. That was, for us, a unique approach. We backed that company, and when he went public, and 2 years later, he had a $14 billion market cap from scratch.
Did he target where he wanted to go out of the U.S.?
Usually people look at the U.S. market as a very large market and a safe place to start. The rest of the world includes Asia, Middle East, Europe. His idea was to go into Europe and Asia with large corporate partners. So here at Allegis, at our venture fund, we have 33 major corporations who are our partners, 2 of which were Fujitsu and Siemens. So he talked to Fujitsu and he talked to Siemens and co-branded his product when he only had 4 employees in the company. So he had brand and distribution in Asia and brand and distribution in Europe, and he built that company to $500 million a year run rate in his 24th month.
But he was already good before he started, right?
He was a VP of marketing at a company that had gone public. It was a company called Network Peripherals. He was ready for the next step. Prior to that, he had been in Sun Microsystems. So he was coming up the process of developing business acumen. He started in sales, then he went to marketing, then he went to a public company, and then he became CEO of what today is a very well-known public company.
So that seems like a kind of a normal progression. What about someone who went through just immediate progression? Maybe they didn't have the same background and all of a sudden, boom.
Yeah, well, that happens a lot in the internet. If you look at Google, basically you're dealing with two PhDs who came up with a better way of doing search. These people at Stanford, where they did their PhD work, found a better way. They found something that appealed to the sweet spot in the audience. Simplistic, very focused, and quick, and that worked. So 0 to now $150 billion market cap company in less than 10 years.
So how did you get started being a venture capitalist?
Well, I started on the other side. I was an entrepreneur. Together with my wife, Virginia, we built a software company in the 1970s. We were quite fortunate. We merged it with a larger company and had a public offering. And from that, we were able to take some of our own personal money and begin making angel-type investments. And then in 1980, together with a couple of other people, we launched a venture fund, very small at the time, $19 million. Today, a $19 million fund wouldn't even be listed in the venture capital directory.
When you went IPO, what made you want to invest or be an angel investor in other people's company instead of continuing to invest in yourself and maybe starting another company?
That's an interesting question, and some people come down on both sides of the equation on that. There are serial entrepreneurs who'll go back and do the next one and the next one and the next one. Hopefully maybe you will. Yeah, they didn't get enough punishment the first time, so they're going to go back and get punished the second time. On the other side of the coin, people who have gone through that process have a very valuable learning experience. It's not book learning, it's real practical experience. And it's hard. It's very hard to go from a startup through all of the funding processes, through building your business big enough. Usually it has to be more than a single product. It has to be more than just a single market in order to be a successful public company. And what you do is you learn an awful lot. And if you're inclined to want to share that, you tend to go into something like angel investing or venture capital investing and leverage yourself that way. So instead of doing one more startup, I mean, I've been involved in over 70 public companies, not personally, but through our venture fund. And we could never do that as an individual.
What were some of the lessons that you learned while you were taking that first company public?
Well, the most important lesson I always say to entrepreneurs is you've got to focus. People get distracted when they do startups. There's changes in course that's necessary and quite frequent, actually. You start out on one path and maybe you have to move. But you can get distracted. You can focus on the wrong issues. You can worry about too many ideas and try to get into too many markets. You can have too many products. You can worry about the structure of the deal. You can worry about who's doing what in the company and what their titles are. All of those are irrelevant. The thing that's relevant is focus, focus, focus.
Well, how do you know what to focus on?
Well, that's what separates a great entrepreneur just from somebody who wants to start a company. They have to have a vision. They have to be able to articulate that vision in a very simple way. I don't like to see vision statements more than 1 or 2 sentences at the most. Then they have to understand what their mission is within that vision. So if they have this very broad vision of what's going to change in the world, then they have to say, what place do I want to play in that? And that becomes their mission statement. That's what they have to focus on, and they have to remember, don't vary from the mission. Then they have to do all of the steps necessary to execute on the mission. To build the product, they have to build the team, they have to build the market. But at least they know where they're going.
Did you have all that when you first
No.
were in that company? Okay.
Actually, it may sound a little self-serving, but we did. But we did for a different reason. We got into our own business more by accident. I was a national marketing manager for manufacturing systems for IBM, and my wife, Virginia, was a developer in the IBM Santa Teresa labs down in San Jose, and she was working on manufacturing systems. And IBM was the leader, but only for big computer systems. So very, very large, multi-million dollars, and only very large companies could afford those systems. And what we kept hoping was that IBM would go after mid-size and small businesses with smaller computers. But that was not in their horizon or vision. And so when we had the opportunity to do that, we were focused on that market. We had a single product, and we became a global company in that specific area.
Did you have distractions and then you determined that, no, we're not going to get distracted this way, we're going to stay on this course?
Every day somebody would walk into our office and try to move us slightly from where we were. Well, instead of manufacturing, how about accounting? And instead of accounting, how about a sales system? All of these were good ideas, but they're distractions. We became very good at what we did and what we knew by staying focused.
Has there been a difference that you've seen from the first company that you took public to the 70th company? Has it gotten easier?
Currently, it's harder. In fact, the United States is going through a period now because of Sarbanes-Oxley where it is very difficult to go public. And the U.S. capital markets, the NASDAQ, which is the public market where most technology companies go, has lost its lead to the London Exchange, the AIM market in London. They're losing it to the Hong Kong Exchange and to the Tokyo Exchange because it's too difficult now for a young company to go public in the U.S. Over time, that's ebbed and flowed, but the basic principles are still there. During the bubble, if you can remember that, people took companies public on concepts, not real businesses, and that's why the bubble burst. And you see a little of it again, especially in places like China where there's a very big bubble. But by and large, if you do it right, if you're focused, and if you build real businesses, the process of going public is the same.
How about working with your wife? Do you think that you might have had a different outcome if you weren't working with your wife in that situation?
Well, I would have been tempted less to kill somebody. It's a very trying experience to work with your wife. You probably may find that out yourselves. On the other side of the coin, if you're both driven, and we were both driven, and you're both entrepreneurial, then it can be a benefit, because if, for example, in a husband-wife team, if one is driven and very entrepreneurial and the other one isn't, that causes conflicts, because being an entrepreneur is a 24/7 process, and if the other person is not interested in that, that can cause conflict. Working with my wife, in this case, she came from an entrepreneurial family. She was, in fact, I think more driven than I was. We fed off each other. That caused also some problems, but at least we were going down the same path.
Do you think that as an entrepreneur, and then you've met quite a bit of entrepreneurs, what are the things that make the successful entrepreneur successful and the unsuccessful ones unsuccessful?
Well, that's the hardest question for any prospective investor or co-founder or employee. I liken it to the difference between a great entrepreneur and a charlatan. A charlatan is somebody who has great enthusiasm, has a wonderful idea, and can convince almost anybody to go along with them along that process. A great entrepreneur has to do the same thing. The difference is a great entrepreneur is dealing with something real, whereas a charlatan is dealing with something phony. So the entrepreneur has to have great passion and has to really believe in what they're doing, and they have to be able to convey that message to everybody that they're involved with, their employees, their customers, their suppliers, and their investors. So we look for that as, is this the kind of person that can motivate and build teams? Is this the kind of person that will listen to their customers? Is this the kind of person that wants greatness?
But then when they come in and pitch you, right? We had talked a little bit earlier, and you said, man, in the beginning stages of that pitch, you kind of have an idea already. So what are the indicators that are telling you whether that person is the type of person you want or the type of person that maybe is not a good match?
Well, if you step back and say, how do you build a public company, and what are the issues of building a public company, the job of the CEO becomes very clear. The job of the CEO is to provide the resources for everybody else in the company. And the CEO is the only person who can do that, because investors who invest in the company give the company the ability to acquire the resources, whether that's people, facilities, equipment, parts. And when you look at somebody, you have to determine, is that the kind of person that will be attractive to people to invest in? And people want to invest in people that they like, that they believe, so there's a level of trust and honesty, and that they can understand, no matter how complex the business is, understand it simply, and then believe, can this person execute? So we focus, and I specifically focus, on is that person capable of doing those things? They may be better engineers in the world, they may be better salespeople in the world, they may be better marketing people in the world. That's fine. That entrepreneur can hire them. He does not, or she does not, have to be the best in that case. What they have to do is they have to be able to tell the best story.
My question was in regards to, you talked about an entrepreneur being similar to a leader. I was thinking, comparing it to a CEO. Do you oftentimes, at the entrepreneur's idea, then do they take that CEO position?
Well, you know, that's the give and take between venture capitalists and entrepreneurs. The issue is that an entrepreneur can come from many different walks of life. They can be doctors, they can be lawyers, they can be engineers. And they may be very good at doing what they do with their idea, but they may not be very good at fundraising, they may not be very good at recruiting, they may not be leaders. So that's when you have to make the tough choices and say, does that entrepreneur have to be the chief executive officer? If somebody wants to build something really big and successful, then that should be their goal, and they should get the best person to do that. And if it's not them, then they should find somebody else. If they go to venture capitalists, by the way, that's a decision we make early in the game, and if we find that the entrepreneur is not willing to listen, or at least consider bringing in somebody stronger as a chief executive officer, we probably won't invest.
Is that really hard for them to take that type of feedback?
In some cases it is. We were the original investor in Palm, you know, the personal digital assistant. And Jeff Hawkins, who is a scientist who studies people's brains, was the designer of the Palm device, thinking about how do people store information about their telephone numbers, addresses, and those kinds of things. But he was not a good manager. And so he was not only asking for venture capital money, he was asking for venture capital help in recruiting. And we recruited Donna Dubinsky, who was at Apple at the time, and she was running Claris, the database company, into Palm. And they made a wonderful team, and they've been a team. They did Palm, then they did Handspring, and now they have a new company focused on the brain. And they've worked well together for many years because he recognized that wasn't his strength.
So you guys invested in Palm and 3Com, right?
We were original investor in both of those companies, but at a very different time. 3Com was in the late 70s. Palm was in the middle, I think around late 80s, actually.
Did you invest in Handspring?
We did not invest in Handspring, but that wasn't our decision. Donna Dubinsky, when she was the CEO, eventually Palm was acquired by 3Com. Mm-hmm. And she and Jeff were quite frustrated over a period of time and wanted to leave. And Donna came and talked to me about would we invest in her company if she left. And I told her at the time, frankly, how much do you need, Donna? And she said $10 million. And I said, we'll give you $10 million at any valuation. Now, if you know entrepreneurs, that's a story they love to hear, right? Any valuation, that really resonates with them. She said, let me think about it and go back to 3Com and see whether we really want to do this. And 3 weeks later, she called me and she said, I'd love to take your offer, but I have a better offer. And I said, a better offer than all the money you want at any valuation? She says, yes, John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins wants to do my deal. I said, go do that, because he's the best venture capitalist out there. And it's more important to have somebody like John Doerr do your deal than it is to get a better valuation.
So
and she's smart enough to
was that a strain on the relationship at all then?
No, we're great friends today, and I felt that she made the right choice. And you know, we win some and we lose some. We would have loved to have Handspring, but on the other side of the coin, the best thing for her is what she did. And she was a tough entrepreneur who made the right choices for her company, not necessarily the best friendly choices.
Dragon Bridge Capital, could you tell us how that came about?
Yeah, so Dragon Bridge is located here in Honolulu, but our main field of operations is China. And our goal is to help Chinese companies who want to come to the U.S. for joint ventures, mergers and acquisitions, and eventually to go public on the U.S. markets. We did that in partnership with the state of Hawaii. This was originated by Governor Linda Lingle during her visit to China in 2005, and stemmed from an idea that, who is the director of business development and tourism for the state, began to work on, together with a few other people in Hawaii, connecting Hawaii with China. And in order to do that and help bring companies here to Hawaii, you need to have a merchant bank. And Dragon Bridge is a merchant bank that we created for that purpose.
So you did it in conjunction with the state, but why do you do business in Hawaii in general? It's kind of out of the way and so on, right?
Well, I live in Hawaii and I love Hawaii, and I've always wanted to live in Hawaii since I first came out here in the 60s. I think that Hawaii has a lot to offer. It can show people how many different cultures can work together. It's somewhat of a bridge between the U.S. mainland and Asia. It knows how to navigate those waters. In today's world of the internet, you can do business almost anywhere. And so consequently, Hawaii is not necessarily a place where you would do manufacturing, but you can certainly do innovation here. We have some great technologies at our University of Hawaii, at our medical school, and so I'm quite bullish on Hawaii.
How many entrepreneurs do you think you've dealt with over your career?
Well, there's been probably hundreds I'd like to strangle. We look at between 200 and 300 companies a month. We've been doing this for nearly 30 years. So our Rolodex is kind of large. We back about 12 companies a year, about one a month. So it's probably been somewhere around 400 companies. There usually maybe 5 or 10 founders that are the core pieces of those companies. So if you do the math, you're talking about a few thousand people.
So in your opinion, can entrepreneurship be taught, or you have to be born with it?
It reminds me, I took a sales course in school, and the question in the sales course was, can salesmen be taught or they have to be born? And in the sales school, they obviously think they can teach sales. Well, I thought you had to be born, so I got that question wrong. However, in the philosophy school, or the philosophy course I took, they believe that people are born certain ways. So I decided to change my answer because I was wrong in the sales department, and I said, no, you have to train them to be good salesmen. And of course, in the philosophy department, that was wrong. So I got the same question wrong twice, even though I changed the answer. And I think that's pretty much the same here. I think you can teach the tools to entrepreneurs so that they can learn certain things about building their business, about raising money, about compensating employees, about focus. But I almost think it has to be in your gut, or at least a willingness to take the risks of being an entrepreneur. Because basically, when it comes down to it, entrepreneurs are risk takers, and some people just aren't, and they shouldn't try that. Although trying it and failing can actually be a great benefit, and then you can use that experience wherever you go.
Are you finding any common similarities or differences between entrepreneurs worldwide?
I think there's some cultural issues that you have to deal with. For example, in China and in parts of Southeast Asia and Japan, there's a tendency for an entrepreneur to want to own and control their own businesses. In the US, the tendency is to build teams and share the ownership and share the responsibilities. That's a fundamental difference because in a lot of the Asian countries, you're betting on one person, and that's difficult. In the US, you're betting on a team, so therefore each person doesn't have to be strong in areas other than the area that they function in, and I think that's easier. But in general, they all want pretty much the same thing: success.
So what's the difficulty being that there are those differences now that you have Dragon Bridge Capital bringing the Asian companies to the U.S. and they work differently?
Yeah, it's a very difficult problem. We are struggling on that kind of an issue. We found a company in Hong Kong that was a wonderful startup company. In looking at companies, you've got better, you've got incredible, and you've got the unthinkable. And better is, they do it a little better, it's a little cheaper, they paint it blue instead of red. Incredible is, wow, this is really pretty nice. But, maybe it's like an iPod. And if you think about that compared to the Walkman, yeah, it's pretty incredible. We found a company in Hong Kong that was a true leap. The problem was that all of the entrepreneurs were in their very early 20s, and the 4 founding partners of the company all wanted to be on the board of directors. Well, that's a prescription for disaster in the US market, because you can't have everybody at the board of director level as employees. or else nothing ever gets settled because there's no chief executive who can enforce these things, and there's no board that the chief executive reports to because he reports to his founders. That's a prescription for not only failure, but also for an inability to raise money, because investors don't want to invest into a pool of people at the board level. At the team level, that's different. And so we were not able to work with that company because we could not change the cultural bias that they had, that they all had to be treated equally.
Were they an unthinkable company?
Yeah. And we think about that all the time. I'm saying to myself, we got to go back and talk to them one more time.
Maybe in a few years when they get older and wiser.
I think that'll probably happen. I think what'll happen to them is they'll get a set of investors who will invest because of the quality of the idea, but will get frustrated over time of dealing with them. So we're keeping tabs on them.
So in a global market now, where does cultural translation come into play? Because you have the United States people wanting to deal with China and Japan and so on, Europe. Where does that come into play?
Well, first of all, you have to be customer focused, right? So if you've got a set of products or services that want to serve a market, you've got to be very sensitive to that market. That usually means that when you staff people in those countries, you have to staff locals. And you have to give them the authority to productize the product or the service to the local market. But you do have to think globally. So for example, in Silicon Valley, we may design a product at a company, and we may build the product in China, and we may distribute it globally through all different kinds of distribution channels, and use those channels that know their markets best.
It's kind of like the Spam meal at McDonald's here, right?
Right.
Think globally, act locally.
Yeah, I don't think you want to sell Spam in New York.
When you're looking at China, because everybody says China, 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 but you've seen bubbles come and go.
Right.
What's the process that you're using to identify which markets are the ones that you really want to spend a lot of time in?
Well, I think if you ignore China, you ignore it at your own risk. And if you go into China, you absorb an enormous risk, because on top of the normal startup risks, which are many, you impose government regulations which change on a regular basis, and you have to deal with things like transparency and financial reporting. So you have to recognize right off the bat that Chinese companies usually have 3, 4, 5 sets of books, right? One for the taxman, one for their investors, and one of which, or 2 of which, they use to run the company. So trust becomes the essence of that, and transparency. So what we do is we always focus on the people. And it's obvious that the market is big, so we normally don't have to worry too much about the market. We do have to worry about what the consumers are willing to pay for. So in China, people are willing to pay for certain things, but not willing to pay for other things. So you have to design your product or your service quite differently than you might in the US, where people have a different attitude about some of those things, or even in the rest of the world. But it comes back down to people, right? So in the people issue, we look for transparency and honesty. We look for focus, and we look for people who we want to deal with. Actually, people we like. We don't want to invest with people we don't like.
Mm-hmm. And how do you determine that, though? Because everybody puts their best foot forward initially, and how do you determine those things up front?
It's kind of like speed dating. Everybody's got their story, but you get a certain feeling about people. Obviously, it comes with some experience, but also it comes with being burned. So if you look at the venture capital process, my wife points out to me that dumb monkeys could do a better job probably than venture capitalists, because we look at 200 companies a month, 300 companies a month. We study 10, we invest in 1, and we're wrong 2/3 of the time. So I mean, figure the odds. So the question really does become, when you go back and you say what worked and what didn't work, it came down to people that you could talk with, and they would respect your ideas and you would respect theirs. And when you meet people on the street, you tend to either want to be with them or not want to be with them. It's very, very similar.
What kind of things do you do to nurture the relationship and find out if this is truly something that's going to be long-term for both of you?
Well, again, we go back to, is this just a better product? Is this just a product? Is this a product that has a short life, but is not really a company? Is this an incredible product that leads itself to many other products? Is this something that, wow, So obviously the wow is the kind of thing that you're always hoping for, but very rarely ever see. And your hope is that if you find the right people, they'll at least do the incredible thing instead of the better thing. Because the better thing has a very short life, right? I mean, if you and I compete and mine's a little better than yours, then yours will become better than mine. And eventually the margins will go down because there won't be any real value add, and we'll probably both fail. Or maybe one of us will make it, but it's really against the odds. So our hope is that we find people who have a big vision, but they can describe it very succinctly. 1 or 2 sentences. If they come to us with a full-page description of their vision or 5 paragraphs, we quit right there because we don't understand that. Then, if they show us how they can get there, we can at least believe that as the market develops, they'll develop with it. And if they can show us that they can be leaders, they'll be a leader in whatever, however that market develops. That's what we're looking for. And if they can show us that, then we have to show them that we can be a good partner. In Allegis' case, we have 33 corporate partners who can be customers, who can be test sites, who can be suppliers, who can be distributors, and that may be more valuable than the money we bring to the table.
What's the best example of an entrepreneur that did that for you folks?
In the case of Extreme Networks, we had an entrepreneur. He was actually an entrepreneur in residence in our office. He had been a very successful startup founder, VP of marketing in a company that had gone public. He was 35 or so, made some money, a lot of money. And he was sitting in our office looking at the other gigabit Ethernet startups at the time. In Silicon Valley, there were 13. I don't know how many in the rest of the US or the rest of the world, but the world didn't need a 14th one. And so first we were kind of skeptical when he said he was going to go and explore the opportunity to create the 14th gigabit Ethernet company. And what he did is that he studied very carefully the first 13. And he came to 2 conclusions. One is they all use the same base technology. The semiconductor chip was all bought from a single company. And they all were focused on the US market. So his idea was, why don't we design our own chip and focus on the rest of the world? That was a key set of decisions that differentiated his company from the other 13. And we invested $2 million. Norwest and Trinity also invested $2 million each. So we had a post-financing valuation of $10 million. The founders had $4 million in value, and the investors had $6 million in value. What he did with the money is that he went and designed his own chip. Then, using the partnerships at Allegis, we have 33 corporate partners, and 2 of them are Fujitsu and Siemens. He struck a relationship with Fujitsu and Siemens where they would co-brand his product. And Fujitsu would sell it in Japan and Asia, and Siemens would sell it in Europe and the Middle East. So what he had was a very simplistic marketing plan. He built the product, and he had distribution and brand from the 2 very large corporations. By the way, those 2 corporations have brand and distribution, but very little innovation. So they're looking to marry up with entrepreneurs who are innovative. And in fact, they did not have products for this marketplace. They were afraid their customer base would be attacked eventually by Cisco or 3Com, who did have products in that marketplace. So for them, it was a very good deal. They had an innovative product that was designed even better than the other 13, because the other 13 companies had to put their money into not only engineering, but marketing, distribution, sales. In our company, we only had to put product money into the product. And therefore, we did not have to buy distribution channels. We did not have to build our own sales force. We used theirs. And at the end of the 24th month, we were at a $500 million a year run rate outside of the United States, and then came back and attacked the US market. So very clever use of the proceeds.
Could you tell us about the Weinman Foundation that you and your wife started?
Well, my wife and I started the Weinman Foundation in 1998. And you know, if you look at the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation, ours is the same thing, except we have a lot less zeros than they have in the amount of money we have to spend. And what we focused on were things that were important to us. And that's principally been education, children, abused children. And what we do is we look at about 10 to 15 proposals a year, and we tend to focus in on one or two of them. So we focused at UH, at the business school and at the medical school. My wife's on the board of the Children's Alliance. She takes an active role wherever we invest. So we just don't write the check. We try to get involved and get our hands a little dirty.
Have you always been involved in nonprofit work, or was it once you went public with that company?
Well, it's hard when you're a young entrepreneur to put money, cash is king at the time, and also time, because entrepreneurs are pretty busy, 24/7 type. But in the back of our minds, we were helped by a lot of people, and we always said someday we're going to do the same thing back. And our goal was, when we were financially able, we would help at least entrepreneurs. So that's part of our work at the Pacific Asian Center for Entrepreneurship at UH. And part of it was to make sure that kids who were maybe disadvantaged got a better chance. So I grew up in a pretty rough, poor neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, and very few people made it out of there. And I said, someday, hopefully, we'll be able to help kids make it out, maybe from not the best environment. And my wife came from a very entrepreneurial family. Her father was an immigrant to Canada, didn't speak the language, built up a very successful business. So she lived through that process and said she wanted to do the same thing. So we were kind of united in that idea. And we've put most of our effort and money into scholarships and into helping entrepreneurs, and we love it.
And why are you helping entrepreneurs? What is it that your experience has made such a difference through the other people that have helped you?
Well, it's the future, right? I mean, if you think about innovation and new ideas and lifting the standards of living of people, healthcare, maybe curing cancer or something like that, who's going to do that? It's going to be our entrepreneurs. I mean, it tends not to happen in large companies. It tends not to happen in bureaucracies. It happens by some person who says, I have the vision, I'm going to do it, but they need some help.
And then why Hawaii?
Well, we love Hawaii. I met my wife here. I was stationed in Pearl Harbor. She was a student at the University of Hawaii. We actually met in Hamilton Library, and I still think I have a book there that I haven't returned yet, so I probably have to do that. But she was willing to marry me at the time when I was making $238 a month. We could live in Hawaii. We lived at Radford Terrace, which is Navy housing, and so it was our start. Now we left after a number of years, and we lived in many other places in the world, but we always wanted to come back.
And then when did you know it was time that you could come back?
Well, I think it was Christmas of '98 or '99. Our Christmas plans fell apart. We were supposed to party with or do some things with family and friends. And so our tendency was, whenever that happened, we'd just run down to the airport and get on the next plane going to someplace that was interesting. As it turned out, the next plane going to someplace warm was going to Oahu. So we said, hey, we haven't been to Oahu in a long time. Why don't we do that? We got off and we snuck our way into the Royal Hawaiian, which is a great place to reacquaint yourself with Hawaii, and we fell in love with it again. And we've been coming back ever since, and then we moved here in May of 2004 permanently.
What message could you give the younger people who are building their careers to encourage them to get involved in nonprofit organizations?
Well, I think most young people that I've talked to say, well, I don't have the money and I don't have the time. And that's true. But what they can do is they can do things like, for example, a number of the young entrepreneurial companies in Hawaii, they donate some equity. So, for example, Dustin Shindo at Hoku has given 25,000 shares to the University of Hawaii. Patrick Sullivan at Hawana has given 50,000 shares to the University of Hawaii. Hawaii Biotech has given shares. Now, those shares aren't cash out of their pocket, but what those shares have done, in Dustin Shindo's case, when his company went public, that turned into about $150,000 for the university. That can create projects, it can create programs, it can involve the people at Hoku back into the university so that they can participate in those programs. So they can be doing things that help their company at the same time, and yet at the same time it's not cash out of their pocket, and it's somewhat of an interest to what they're thinking about. So those are ways where I think people can start to think about, maybe I can contribute other than cash. I can contribute some equity in my company. I can contribute by maybe teaching a class or being a participant in a class. Those are areas where they can get started.
How about for people that maybe don't own the company?
How about the employees who have shares? If you're an employee in most of these high-tech companies, especially here in Hawaii, you usually have some equity, maybe it's stock options. What if you were to give 1%? So let's say you have 10,000 shares. Give 100 shares to the university. Give 100 shares to whatever charity you would like to give it to. And maybe someday those shares will be worth something. But even if they're not, it starts the process of giving. And it starts thinking about, well, I gave to that charity, or I gave to that school. How can I help them? So it's an incremental beginning.
If your charity created the ultimate, I guess, result, what would that result look like to you?
I guess my goal, I'd feel good if people were able to reach their potential, whatever that is for them, that they were given the chances to get an education, if that's what they want to do. They would get a chance to start a business or become a doctor, do something where their human capital can contribute to their own well-being and to the community's well-being. My wife and I will feel good about that.
You said that you invest in entrepreneurism. Why is it that you feel it's important for you to give back as a venture capitalist? Because you're also spending a lot of time investing in these people who have ideas to make a difference in their lives.
Well, you know, to be a successful venture capitalist, you have to be a little greedy. You have to be focused on making money. But as you do that, and as you've accumulated more and more, you realize that there's a lot more things in life than that. So I've looked at it as, can I leverage that? What skill set do I have? Well, pretty limited in many ways, but one experience I have is how to build a company and how to focus on building really quality things that are important to people. So if I can leverage that and help an entrepreneur get there, that entrepreneur can probably do many, many other things that I wouldn't even be able to do. So that's a way of leveraging talent. Does that make sense?
Yes. Who has been an important mentor in your life or through your business ventures that have taught you many things, and what did they teach you?
Well, I've had a lot of mentors. My father was a good mentor in the beginning. The one that stands out most in my mind is Admiral McCain. Admiral McCain is the father of Senator John McCain from Arizona. And I worked for Admiral McCain in London for a couple of years. I was his speechwriter and briefing officer, so I was with him a lot. And he eventually came here to Hawaii. He was commander of the Pacific. But when he was in London, he ran the U.S. Naval Forces Europe. And he was one of the great motivators. He was a wonderful speaker. He had tremendous passion. He was a great patriot for the U.S. He was infectious. When he believed in something, anybody around him tended to believe in it. And so not only did his passion lead to his success, but it led to the success of many other people. And what I learned from him was he believed in certain things. He was an extremely focused person, very articulate, and very transparent. You always knew what he thought. He was not the kind of person that would say things for the sake of saying them. And he was very talented at what he did. He was a 4-star admiral, and you don't get to be a 4-star admiral so easily. But the people who worked for him would lay down their lives for him. And I think that's rubbed off a little on his son. I think his son is a leader that people can respect, whether independent of political party. So he left me with the idea that 1, you got to focus. 2 is you've got to be transparent. And 3 is that if you want to be a true leader, you measure that by whether people will kill for you. And we all would have.
You mentioned passion. Passion comes up quite a bit. What are you passionate about?
My own personal passions have to do with the state of Hawaii. I really would love to see Hawaii become successful in expanding and diversifying its economy. And I've watched Silicon Valley do that. I've watched San Diego do that. I've watched the Durham, North Carolina triangle do that. It can be done. And I would love to see Hawaii go down that path. Now, they have the ingredients here to do that. They have a wonderful university with a rich history of research, A lot of that research has not gone into practical products and markets and companies, and so they need some help there. But they're moving in that direction. I think the entrepreneurs in Hawaii can compete with entrepreneurs anywhere in the world. The only modification or suggestions I would have is take risk. Be willing to fail. You learn probably more from your failures than your successes. And sometimes some of the entrepreneurs in Hawaii are a little risk adverse, so they need to be a little more risk adverse. And the third thing is we need to have a sensible capital formation process so that we can invest in these companies. And I think in some ways, we're on the wrong path with some of the tax incentives we have. That's not the right way to do it. But I think both the governor and the legislature will fix that problem, hopefully soon. And so then my passion will be to work with those entrepreneurs to take advantage of the idea of great technologies at our universities, a risk kind of taking philosophy, and a capital to make all of those things work together. And I'll be a happy camper at that point.
So you've been involved in taking 70 companies public. Why do you still do it? Why not retire?
Now you sound like my wife. In fact, you sound like her every day. It's in your blood, you know. I love to go to the beach. I don't think I want to be there 12 hours a day. I used to think that, and I used to try it. I think you have to keep your brain going. And there's nothing better to do that than to be around entrepreneurs, right? Because they're enthusiastic. They don't want to hear that it can't be done. They're always running at that wall, assuming that either the wall is going to give way or they're going to run through it. You know, I love that. I love being around those kinds of people. There was Tommy Davis in Silicon Valley, who was also a mentor. Tommy was 87 years old. He was the founder of Mayfield Fund, which is a great fund, one of the largest and most successful in the United States. And he was 87 years old, and I was talking to him. He was looking at a company. And I said, Tommy, why are you doing this? He said, why wouldn't I do it? What's more fun than this? Now, Tommy had more money probably than God, you know, but he did it for the excitement. And people loved to be around Tommy because he could tell you in 5 words something that other people would take 5 weeks to tell you.
What's the best example or story you've seen of where passion has created something, you know, huge?
I think Amgen is a company that I have great respect for. Amgen is a pharmaceutical company, biotech company. And I remember, I didn't invest, and I think about it all the time, but Amgen started out in Thousand Oaks in a little tilt-up, 2 people. And their goal was to help cancer patients. They were going to figure out a way to offset things like chemotherapy. And they produced a product called EPO, which is what people who are on chemotherapy take to regenerate their white corpuscles. They've changed scores. I don't know how many thousands of people have been on chemotherapy, but they've changed the lives, not only the people who take chemotherapy, but their families, their children. That's really a passion that they had, and they made it work. And I look at that and I say, gee, I'd like to find the next Amgen.
You know, you've been involved in the military, you started companies, now you're a venture capitalist. Based on your experience, what would you say has been your greatest life challenge? And how did you overcome that?
Well, my tennis doubles game is terrible, and I actually got to play in a pro-am with one of the world's great tennis players, and we lost. Challenges is, I think, what strengthen you. And I've had all the normal challenges. I mean, I was arrested when I was a teenager. I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life in jail. I came from a very tough neighborhood. I have a couple of scars on my body, but I worked my way out of those things. My parents helped, batted me around a little, and convinced me that the brig wasn't the right place to spend your time. My wife helped. I think civilized me a little. Not, you know, some people will say I'm still not civilized, but she went a long way to doing that. So the life challenges have been making a success of what's important. I'm still working on that. It's a work in process.
So on the flip side then, what would you say has been your greatest life accomplishment?
I never expected to be successful. It wasn't in my game plan. And I never thought that I'd be financially in a position where I could make a real difference, and you know, we're getting there, and I think we've changed some lives. We started a program over at the John A. Burns School of Medicine, and the first 3 students that are going through our fellowship program there, I think, are going to change Hawaii. I mean, these are really high-quality kids who are all locals, all want to practice medicine here. I think if we leave a legacy of doing 3, 4, 5, 10 of those a year in the next 10 years, it'll make an impact on Hawaii, and I'll feel pretty good about that.
You mentioned in your childhood that you had some rough times. Was there a turning point for you, or a kind of a defining moment?
Yeah, I've got a scar here which cut a vein, and this was in a gang fight. And my dad afterwards said to me, you know, if you want to die at an early age, you just keep this up. But he had a struggle. He was a depression baby. He said, you know, you've got to take a whole different perspective on life. You're on the wrong path. And it had an impact on me. I went from being a terrible student to being a pretty good student, and eventually even being a very good student. And I began to understand what education can do and how it can change your perspective on things. And the Navy again helped by discipline. I got more discipline from my wife, so that helped. And I think when I look at it, my father had a business that went bankrupt, but he did not declare bankruptcy. And I was 13 years old, and I couldn't understand, if he would have declared bankruptcy, he would have been in a position where he didn't have all these creditors coming after him. And he said, I'm not going to do that. It may take a long time, but I'll pay them back. And we didn't have very much money, but he did pay them back. And I learned from that. I looked at that and I said, if he can do that under these conditions, I was 13 years old. You know, I got to get my act together.
At what point in your life did you start to become more entrepreneurial?
Well, it actually happened by accident. I mean, when I got out of the Navy, I went to work for Fairchild Semiconductor, which was the beginning of Silicon Valley days. And it was pretty exciting at Fairchild. You'd go to the cafeteria and you'd look at each lunchroom table would have somebody from sales, somebody from engineering, somebody from research, and somebody from finance. And my first reaction is, geez, that's kind of funny. How do those guys all know each other? And of course, the next week they'd go out and start a company. And Fairchild really started Silicon Valley. So you think a little about it. But I went from Fairchild to IBM, and IBM is very structured and bureaucratic. And I was going to be pretty satisfied to stay there the rest of my life. But IBM was going down a path that was frustrating, in that they only built big computers. They didn't want to build small computers. The world was changing. I had a lot of customers who needed small computers, not big computers. So I felt angry that I couldn't satisfy the customers' needs. And we said, why don't we just do this ourselves, my wife, myself, and one of my partners at IBM, and we started our own company. And after you have the taste of entrepreneurship, very hard to go back, very hard.
Risk, that roller coaster.
Oh, man.
So rewarding.
Yeah, well, your stomach usually is somewhere up here, but it's kind of exciting, you know, and it's a test. And you get better over time, or worse over time. And if you get better over time, then you want to do more. And it gets in your blood.
Would you consider yourself lucky?
Absolutely. When I interview people, I ask people if they're lucky. It tells amazing things about people. First of all, most of them don't know how to answer it, right? Because if they say they're lucky, then they think that you won't credit their skill. And they begin telling you all these stories. You know, they had just told you how great they were at the last job and how wonderful they were at the job before. All of a sudden they start telling you, well, you know, really what happened is the company failed, but it wasn't my fault, we were unlucky. And then the next company didn't do so well, but it wasn't my fault. And before you realize it, you're talking to somebody who hasn't done well at all, even though their resume says they have. So most people who have been successful have had a lot of luck in their lives. And they've either been at the right place at the right time, maybe they positioned themselves there, but they knew how to take advantage of it and to capitalize on it. I don't know of people who have been successful who don't have some luck as part of it. I've had a lot of luck.
Do you believe that you can make your own luck?
I think you can influence your luck. You know, I love the story of Microsoft, right? We actually were an investor in digital research. Digital research was the first operating system for the personal computers. It was an operating system called CP/M. And Gary Kildall was the CEO. And when IBM decided to get into the personal computer business, he went to see digital research. It was in Monterey. And Gary was on vacation, by the way, in Hawaii, and refused to come back to meet with Don Estridge, who was the head of IBM's personal computer business. And so it was a Friday, and here the IBM team is sitting in Monterey, and Gary says, I'm not coming back until Monday. So they had the weekend. So they said, well, we understand that there's this guy, Bill Gates, who's got the basic software language up in Seattle. Might as well go there for the weekend. So they go to talk to Bill Gates, and in discussing buying the basic language, which would operate with the CPM operating system, Bill asked them what their other things they were interested in. And they said, well, we're interested in an operating system. We have a small computer, but we'll probably have to wait until next week before we can strike a deal. And down the street from him was a company that had MS-DOS. He didn't have it. He borrowed some money, I think around $50,000, and went down and bought that and sold it to IBM, and the rest is history. And I look at that and I say, talk about luck. First of all, they would have never gone up to see him if Gary Kildall wouldn't have been in Hawaii. And two is, when they got there, he figured out how to make luck out of just, instead of selling them a language, which wouldn't have been a very big deal, selling them the core to their system. He put himself in position to do that. That's very important. He had a business, he had a product, and he recognized the customer's need. What better story than Bill Gates?
Do you have any last advice for our viewers out there?
Well, take a chance. So that's risk, right? And have confidence in yourself, because if you have confidence in yourself, it rubs off. Other people will have confidence in you. If you don't have confidence in yourself, then that also rubs off. It's worth taking risk, and it's worth failing, because through failure you learn. And great things can happen if you put yourself in a position for those great things to happen to you. So do it.
And then if there's one message you can give to all of our viewers and listeners out there, what would that one message be?
Understand who you are, and remember that you probably have been helped by people to get where you are, and don't turn your back on that, and try to help people to make a success out of their lives, and that's probably more rewarding than making it out of your own life.
Well, thanks so much, Barry, for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Carrie.
If you resonate with Greater Good Radio, please join our community at www.greatergoodradio.com, where you can get access to exclusive content and offerings. Hope to see you soon.